you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. Can everyone hear me all right? Excellent. Well, it sounds like you guys just had lunch, so I'll try to be lively and get you waking up. And if you have any questions after I'm done speaking, I would love to have a Q&A with you about anything facing the state of Wisconsin and our country. So I'm very happy to be here. The best part of my job, quite frankly, is being around real people, not politicians. So any chance I have to be around people like you, I relish and really appreciate the opportunity. So I think we all know we're at a critical time here in Wisconsin, but also in our nation. We look at what's happening, the race to the White House, we call it a race to the bottom on the Republican side of things. So we look at what's happening in Wisconsin with these attacks on workers. We're preparing for a busy fall session in the Legislative Assembly, and we've seen Republicans who've been attacking our clean and open government and who are going to continue to attack a government that works for the people. But Wisconsin Democrats are working really hard for you, and we've been focusing on legislation that the hardworking people of Wisconsin deserve and have already earned, just hasn't shown up in the Capitol yet. I hear from far too many people every single day. I just actually got off the phone with a woman who was crying because she just cannot afford the cost of college while trying to also make a living. And we hear all the time about how people are struggling, how they just can't get ahead. We hear from people who work 1, 2, 3 jobs, who have children, who struggle to afford the cost of child care. They're worried about retirement. They can't pay their health care. They're worried about the cost of college education, or even if they'll be able to afford putting their children in college. But more than anything, from the common thread among all these people, whether they feel like they're drowning in bills and debt, or they feel like no one listens to them, the common thread is that they know that government isn't working. They know that government right now serves a few wealthy special interests, and it doesn't help them. They see a system that only benefits the class of donors and special interests and lobbyists and out-of-state billionaires that are running rampant through the state of Wisconsin and our capital and also in our nation. It's time to change that. And Assembly Democrats have been working hard for Wisconsin's hardworking people. We've laid out an agenda that I'll outline later in the day. But first I want to take a look at what's going on in our state. What is the landscape here? The people across Wisconsin have to be scratching their heads as the Republicans have perfected political doublespeak, reinforcing all of the worst stereotypes about politicians. We all know they only care about money, they only care about electing themselves and getting reelected. They can't keep their word when they make their promises. And over again, Governor Walker and the Republican majority promise one thing and then turn around and do another. All, of course, at the beck and call of their out-of-state billionaire friends, the Koch brothers, special interests that are now in the captain's seat, that are running the show down in Madison to determine the future of our state. And unfortunately, they are using working families as their political football to simply further their own political ambitions and reward their rich friends, and it's not working. My Democratic colleagues and I know that. You know that. Everyone in Wisconsin seems to know that at this point. Heck, it's why the governor finally dropped out of the presidential race after only 70 days. Turns out if you're attacking workers, no one likes you. You'd think you'd know that sooner. Think about that for a minute. Governor Walker is too extreme for even Republican primary voters. His campaign was all about attacking workers. It's the only thing he ran on. I hate unions, over and over and over and over. Did anyone care? No, nobody said good for you. They said, okay, do you have any other ideas? He couldn't even get 1% of the Republican primary voters to like him. That's why he was rejected by them, despite incredible amounts of funding from billionaires. And because we all know, if you don't stand with workers, you stand for no one but yourself. They've done a lot of damage in a very short time under Governor Walker's rule. One of the first attacks they made during the session on working men and women was another broken promise by Scott Walker and the Republican majority. Does everyone remember when, in February, when people started to feel the heat across Wisconsin from one of the worst budgets our state has ever seen, the governor said he wouldn't sign right to work because it was a distraction. Everyone remember that? Yes. What happened a couple weeks later? Right to work was introduced. The governor said it was a distraction. What happened a few weeks later? Right to work became law. What happened a few weeks after that? The governor was in South Carolina and Iowa and Nevada and New Hampshire and Florida and California bragging to rooms of out-of-state billionaires about how he was going to crush unions and how he had just signed a right-to-work law. This is how it works. He distracts, he lies, he says one thing and does another, and then no one holds him, well, I shouldn't say no one holds him accountable, but we've got to get better at holding him accountable at the ballot box. We've got to make sure that every working man and woman, not just half of the people in the state, know that Walker doesn't stand for them and the Republicans are attacking them. I have to say that despite the destructive agenda in Madison, there are people fighting for you, and I want you to know that. Assembly Democrats, actually we were negotiating for time. I was one of the people in the room trying to figure out how much time we could get out of the other side. We said, we're going to ask for 48 hours to debate right to work. 48 hours straight, no breaks. And they laughed and they said, oh, we'll give you 12. I said, no, you're not giving us 12. So we made it to 24 hours, and I was very happy with that, because quite frankly, that was my original goal. I just started high. So they were super mad, I have to say, the Republicans, who had to stay in that room, and most of them didn't stay in that room for 24 hours, but they had to listen to us read powerful testimony from the people who came down at the Capitol to testify against right to work, from the plumbers, and the operating engineers, and the carpenters, and the electricians, and the many, many, many hardworking men and women and their unions across the state. And they didn't like having to hear about their constituents. They didn't like having to hear about how they were about to vote against their own people. They didn't like hearing that 450 businesses across the state of Wisconsin were super opposed to this legislation because they know the best workforce they can get, bar none in the nation, is with a union. They know that, and that's why the businesses were opposed. So they were super offended that we were willing to not only speak for 24 hours straight, which we did, but also that we brought the voices of their constituents with them to Madison. They did not like that one bit. And I think that says a lot. It's a shame that right to work passed, because we already know Wisconsin is lagging the nation in job growth. We know that Wisconsin's middle class has lost and shrunk the most of any state in the nation. And we know that anti-union, anti-working policies only make that worse. We know that your wages go down. We know that workplace safety is at risk with right to work. So here we are. Right to work tore away the ladder of opportunity at a time when hardworking Wisconsin families need the chance to get ahead. This anti-worker agenda will have a devastating effect on our state's economy, but more importantly on our workers' health and safety and their families' lives. It's hard to look at what's happening in Wisconsin when all I have to do is look west to Minnesota. And I don't know about you, but like most Wisconsinites, I play fantasy football, love watching the Packers, and I get really riled up about the Packers-Vikings rivalry. And to see Minnesota vesting us on economic opportunity, investing in their public schools, protecting workers, creating jobs, having a thriving economy over there, while here in Wisconsin, we drew the short straw, it's just salt in the wounds. The only thing we have left, it seems, is the Packers. So unfortunately for families and workers all across Wisconsin, the broken promises and disappointments did not end at right to work, did not end at prevailing wage, which also they've made prevailing wage reforms. It even went further. Walker put forward a state budget. Instead of taking responsibility for the people of the state and investing in Wisconsin, he put forward one of the worst budgets we've ever seen in Wisconsin history. It was a Frankenstein budget. Basically, he took some money from donors and put some stuff in for his donors, and he took some more money from other donors outside the state, put in more money in special interest legislation for them. He didn't do anything good for workers. In fact, he took all references to living wage in the budget and changed it to minimum wage. He took your right to a weekend if you work in a factory away. It's now voluntary to work those 7 days in a row, but we all know that's not really voluntary when an employer has their say. He not only did that, but, and the Republicans who voted for this budget, he didn't fund our roads, he didn't fund our schools, our universities, our technical colleges, he didn't increase access to health care, he didn't protect workers, he didn't raise wages. Instead, the budget revealed that the Republicans' priority was helping the governor run for president. That budget made much more sense as a campaign document than as a fiscal document. It took millions of dollars away from our public schools, gave it to private schools, it slashed the budget for our university system, and it dismantled the long-term care system that seniors and people with disabilities rely on. So, all in all, I think the people of Wisconsin paid a very heavy price just so the governor could run for president. And I think it's important to note that the governor still hasn't reimbursed the Wisconsin taxpayer for his exorbitant. Last month, I introduced legislation that will prevent any future abuse of taxpayer dollars for any politician, regardless of party, who wants to run for office and put the people of Wisconsin second and their personal ambitions first. They cannot, under this legislation, use the taxpayer dollar as their personal piggy bank. And I think it's interesting because I thought, for a party that preaches fiscal responsibility, maybe Republicans would be willing to co-sponsor my legislation, pass it with me, and sign it into law. What's interesting is the only people who signed on to my bill are Democrats. And when I asked my Republican colleagues why they're not willing to pass the Wisconsin Taxpayer Protection Act, which is what my bill is called, they don't have an answer. It's because they're carrying water for the governor who thinks he could be president instead of doing the right thing. I don't think any person, whether they're an independent, a Democrat, a Green, a Libertarian, a Republican, no one should be able to use your hard-earned tax dollars for their own personal gain. That's wrong. So I've also been demanding from the governor an itemized list of all of his expenses, including the cost of both security and travel for his campaign, and I want him to reimburse the taxpayer for every cent. Here's the problem. He's about $800,000 in debt for his campaign. And I have said, and the news media has been helping me with this, they've been calling and calling and calling Walker's Department Administration. I've said before any campaign consultant or pollster or vendor gets a dime or a nickel or a penny, the taxpayers should get first drop. You guys should get your money back. So we're working on that right now, and I wish it were bipartisan. I wish I could say the people of Wisconsin can rely on their elected representatives to do the right thing, but unfortunately it's still become a partisan issue. So what else have we been working on in Madison to counteract this destructive anti-worker, anti-family agenda? I have a to-do list now that the governor is back in the state and hopefully all my fellow legislators are paying attention. We were in Madison yesterday for a legislative session, and I have to say, we didn't accomplish anything good in my opinion, but here's a to-do list that I think is positive, and I really believe we need to put forward a positive and proactive agenda that gives the people of Wisconsin hope and that benefits everyone. So here's our agenda, and it's something that we have bills for every single one of these items, and it's something that if Democrats are in the majority, this is what we'd be doing right now. First of all, Wisconsin's middle class has shrunk more than any other in the nation. So I think it's time to bring back the middle class and give everyone the economic security they deserve. Let's start with holding public hearings on bills Assembly Democrats have already introduced, legislation aimed at making child care more affordable for middle class families, bills to allow people with student loan debt to refinance their loans just like you can a car or mortgage, and also get a tax deduction for your student loan payments. This helps about 1 million people in Wisconsin. Allow workers to opt into a retirement fund modeled after the Wisconsin Retirement Security system if they do not already have one. And passing earned sick days, because 1 in 4 American workers does not have access to a single paid sick day, believe it or not. And this is America. It's unbelievable to me. So that's part of our agenda. We also think that the governor should accept the Badger Care expansion. He's no longer running for president, so he doesn't need to run against Obamacare. Let's just take that money. We would save $360 million in 2 years. $360 million. What could we do with that money? We could save $550 million in 5 years. So that's the kind of money we could save, and 80,000 more people would have health care. What does that mean? They don't use the ER for their preventative care, and what happens for the rest of us? Our deductibles don't go up. Our co-insurance goes down. That's what happens when we cover more people. We need to stop privatizing Wisconsin services and institutions. When you privatize, what you're doing is you're basically rewarding campaign donors and putting them above the people. Long-term care services, if any of you in the room know anyone who has a disability, who relies on IRIS or family care, those services should remain local and they shouldn't be handed over to private for-profit national insurance companies. We need to stop giving public money to private schools. We need to renew Wisconsin's commitment to our cherished public schools, colleges, and universities so everyone can have a fair shake. We need to invest in our infrastructure. This is one of the most embarrassing things that I've seen in the budget. So many of my colleagues signed a stupid pledge to never raise taxes, not thinking about the long-term consequences of that. And as a result, they have failed to fund hundreds of millions of dollars of road projects that need to happen now. What does that mean? By 2023, almost half of our roads across the state will be crumbling. Because a bunch of legislators were too stupid to do the right thing and find a fair funding mechanism for our roads. So let's fund our roads, let's repair our bridges, let's make sure our small towns have the infrastructure they need, let's expand rural broadband, which a lot of people in small towns don't have. Stop freezing out transportation funding just to use it in your next campaign. It does not work. We also just need to honor workers. I'm tired of hearing the anti-worker attacks in Madison. We need to value your hard work with policies that help you thrive. Raise the minimum wage. It's not lame. It's sorely needed. If anyone wants to talk about reducing government, the best way to do that is raise the minimum wage so fewer people are dependent on government programs. And we'd have more tax revenue, which we could invest in things like our roads and our schools. We need to stop using women's health as a political football to toss around and score political points with, and that's what happened yesterday in Madison. We need to make sure that everyone has health care, period. And instead of running businesses out of the state, one of the first things the governor did when he came into office was run $1 billion of wind projects out of the state. We need to actually invest in clean energy. We need to restore the DNR to a nonpartisan and evidence-based agency, and we need to protect our clean air and water, fund our state parks, fund recycling. This sounds radical, I know, but after all the attacks in Madison, it has to be said. The campaign donors are getting precedent over our beautiful natural resources that our economy thrives from, and that we all enjoy, whether it's hiking, fishing, hunting, you name it. We need to strengthen voting access instead of eroding voters' rights. They attacked voting on weekends. We need to expand weekend hours for voting. I personally think we need to make sure that voting is a holiday so everyone can do it. I think everyone should get election day off. But we also need to implement automatic voter registration. Several other states have done this now, and we have a bill. Assembly Democrats just introduced it to do the same thing. You're automatically registered if you have a driver's license. We need to reform government so it truly works for everyone. Nonpartisan redistricting reform so that politicians don't get to choose their voters. Voters choose their politicians. We need that, not the system we have now where the maps are rigged and you're running in an 80% Republican district or an 80% Democrat district. That makes it so that people deliberately butt heads in Madison. You need to be representing everyone, not just a few people. We need to commit to campaign finance reform and ending dark money in politics. We need to get money out of politics and have the people of Wisconsin speak again. And finally, we need to unite each other. We need to unite each other around our shared love of Wisconsin. We love the Packers, our thousands of lakes, our tradition of enjoying a local beer or an old-fashioned and Friday night fish fry. We love our families, we love our communities, we love our hard work ethic, and we're proud of that. So why not take our pride and make sure that everyone can succeed and take care of one another? So while I'm disappointed at what's been going on in Madison, I'm disappointed that the governor has put his personal ambitions ahead of the people of our state, I do see opportunities for us. I challenge my colleagues, every single one of my colleagues across the aisle, to take a look at this list and to approach it in good faith. A lot of these ideas shouldn't be partisan. The idea of investing in our roads and our education and giving people health care shouldn't be too crazy. This is how Wisconsin used to work. This is how Wisconsin used to work under different governors and different parties. I think it's time to have a government that represents everyone and an economy that truly works for everyone, not just a few people who can afford to lobby in Congress or in the Capitol. So I think it's time for my colleagues to do the right thing, and I'm going to keep on calling for them. It's time to honor the hardworking men and women of our state who deserve better. We need to show them that we respect and value the work that you all do to build our communities and not use workers as disposable political props to win elections. Now is the time to honor workers' long days in the dead of winter and the heat of summer by making sure that policies reflect what they want to see happen. We have an opportunity to return our state to days when we were the nice, polite Midwestern Wisconsinites who respect and value each other because we are neighbors. So we should get to work on this together, and I'm going to keep on calling for that and for civility, especially now that the governor doesn't have a pesky presidential race to worry about. I hope that I can see some progress, but I have a pledge for you, and it's not a Grover Norquist pledge. I hope that I can get my colleagues across the aisle to do the right thing. But if I can't, I pledge to you that my Democratic colleagues and I will fight to protect workers because we know without you, we don't succeed. We know that you have built our state and you have earned the advocate for all of you to have economic opportunity and security. And at the end of the day, we know we all just want to take pride in doing our work. and have time to spend quality time with their loved ones, their families, in this beautiful state that we all call home. It's not a partisan vision. This is a vision for a better tomorrow. It's part of the Wisconsin way. So with that, I guess I'll go in a little bit. I was asked to speak a little bit about the elections, and I can quickly go over that, but I'm more interested in hearing from you about any questions you may have. Now that the governor is out of the race, I think, as I said before, I think that the Republican primary is a race to the bottom. I don't see anyone championing pro-worker policies at all. I just see who can say the most offensive comments and get the most news cycles in a row of talking about building walls in crazy places, or who's the ugliest out of the candidates. So I think that the tenor of the political debate has been really disappointing. I don't see many adults in this race, quite frankly. I just think they're trying to compete with each other to get the, well, let's see who can say the most offensive thing vote, and that really doesn't benefit the people of Wisconsin. The good news is, whoever comes out of the Republican primary election is going to have said a lot of extremely offensive things. So I think that means they're not as electable in a general election. And I understand that your international group just endorsed Hillary Clinton, and obviously we have a Democratic primary, and I came out of a 9-way primary. I was the furthest. I was the only candidate who was willing to talk about unions and how great they were, actually. And I made a point of pointing that out during the debate. So having benefited from a primary where you really have to prove yourself and you have to work extremely hard to earn the trust of voters, I think a primary is a good opportunity to highlight where our country should go without attacking each other. So in this primary, I think it's good that Bernie Sanders is in because he's got some great, bold ideas. He's willing to speak out on how this government isn't working for everyone and the economy isn't. And I think Hillary Clinton is one of the most qualified people who've ever run for president in our nation's history. So we should all feel very good about where the Democrats are at in this primary and how the primary winner should have a very good chance at the White House in 2016. What that means for us in 2018, though, for the past about 60 years now, whoever holds the White House in a midterm election, whichever party that is, the opposite party does extremely well in those midterms. So, while it'll be great for us and all workers to have a Democrat in the White House, that means in 2018 we're going to have an uphill battle. So when Tammy Baldwin is on the ballot in 2018, a senator who fights extremely hard for everybody, she's going to have a little more of a tough challenge, but I think she'll be just fine. It's just something to think about. I definitely want to make sure that we start thinking about who runs for governor in 2018. We need someone who can actually not only champion workers and get elected, but also help lead on repealing a lot of this destructive legislation that Republicans have passed over the last 5 years. So that's something that we need to think about. In 2016 in the state assembly, which obviously I'm very interested in, I think we have a ton of great pickups, whether it's central Wisconsin, southwest Wisconsin, western Wisconsin, northwest Wisconsin. There are a lot of seats that I think are about 50-50 that because of the terrible votes they've taken on a lot of extreme bills, Democrats have a good shot at. And in the state Senate, they need 3 seats to get to the majority. I think that's certainly possible as well. So when it comes to elections, there's hope, but what I tell everyone is this: it's not enough to just vote. You need to make sure that everyone that you know who wants to vote is able to, and that they have their ID ready, because voter ID will be implemented, so that's another challenge. There's about, I think, several 100,000 people in the state who don't have an ID. So we have to make sure those people get the ID they need to vote. But we also need to make sure that after voting, you pay attention. And the people in this room are much more inclined to pay attention to electoral politics and your legislators than the average citizen. But I just want you to remember that once you're done voting, it's extremely important to remember to hold your elected officials accountable. If they're doing things you don't like, you need to tell them, and you need to tell them to their face. And ask them why they're voting against you, and ask them to justify it. There's nothing that scares a politician more than a constituent asking them tough questions and holding them accountable. So I encourage you to do that, because our democracy thrives when we have government watchdogs and the people who are willing to speak out and ask tough questions. But I also think it makes the following elections a lot more high-minded when it comes to the issues, because people have been challenged on them, and it brings people forward as well. So it's truly an honor to speak in front of you today, and I would appreciate the opportunity for any questions at this time.
We were talking about a little bit about gerrymandering and stuff like that. It'd be nice to see something on that. For the state budgets hitting the local school districts, they've had a lot of referendums to exceed the caps or keep the lights on in the furnaces. Has any of them ever got voted down? I heard a majority went through, and is that an opportunity to present to people and say they actually do care about education? Get off your butts and do something.
That's a great question. So the question was about school referendums. There have been many in the past 4 or 5 years because our schools are, in my opinion, underfunded. Since 2010, our schools have lost about $2.4 billion. So for the first time in our state's history, the average per student spending is lower than the nation's average. Everyone knows across the nation, you want to go to public schools, go to Wisconsin, but we're no longer surpassing the nation. We're below that now. So that says a lot. Does that mean local school districts and people are stepping up? Absolutely. I think about 2/3, maybe 3/4, more than 50% of school referendums have passed over the last few years. However, especially in rural areas where there's not much of a tax base, like farmland, for example, is a great example of school districts that are slowly dying. In those areas where there's less tax revenue to fund those schools and when the state's not giving them the funds they need, some of these schools are actually looking at dissolving. And we've brought in superintendents across the state into the Capitol to talk about their situation. One school district is shutting down in 2 years, and after 3 failed referendums. And their kids are going to have to be bused to other school districts 2 hours on the bus just to get to school. And I tell people who don't believe that our schools are underfunded because their kids are still getting a great education, and that's true, they are, but under extreme circumstances. We all know the teachers aren't getting paid well, they're not getting raises, they're not getting new textbooks as often, you name it. The quality of their education will suffer. But in the future, I could imagine a state, if we continue down this road for the next 10, 20 years, where there's a Wausau Stevens Point school district and everyone from Rhinelander to Hatley to Eland to Bowler goes to either Wausau or Stevens Point, and that's the school district. You all just sit on a bus for 2 hours. And then there's a Madison school district and people in Viroqua, or maybe Viroqua go to La Crosse, but people in, 2 hours away would end up on the Madison. That's what's going to happen is these schools are going to consolidate, and we're going to see kids on the bus for much longer, and their quality of their education will suffer. So if people don't want to see that, and they want their kids to have good instruction time, they want them to live in their communities and go to school in their communities, we need to invest in our public schools.
What would happen to the private schools?
Well, good question. The private schools in the next decade will receive $800 million from public schools. $800 million. And my Republican colleagues say, well, that's not a lot. That's just like 1% of education funding. To which I would respond, our Constitution, our state's Constitution, actually says that we have a responsibility to fund our public schools. Now, in other states that have stopped doing so and given the money to private schools, like Kansas, there have actually been lawsuits that the state has lost because they haven't been investing in their public schools, and that's another road it looks like we're going down. And the reason why this is happening is because the voucher lobby has spent millions of dollars on elections to elect Republicans. So they're paying off their campaign donors, and it's got to end. It's just super corrupt. Yes?
The 1 in 7 law, that guaranteed an employee to have one day of rest.
Yeah.
Now that changed. Does that mean that employee can be forced those 2 days in the weekend?
So the way that it works, under the 1 in 7, the employer would actually have to ask the Department of Workforce Development in order to get permission if their employee wanted to come forward and it's voluntary. They repealed the 1 in 7 for certain kinds of workers, mainly factory workers. And now the way that it works is it's voluntary. And so your employer cannot technically require you to work 7 in 7, but they could say, well, I noticed that all of you are working 7 days in a row. Why aren't you? And then 2 weeks later, you could be gone for wearing the wrong shirt. So that's the kind of recourse that you have is you'd have to prove that he fired you for that reason. And he could just say, well, he didn't show up to work in the right clothing, and this is a repeated pattern, so I had to fire him. So that's why that protection was so important, because when employers get to say whether or not something's voluntary, we all know that coercion happens in workplaces. It certainly doesn't happen everywhere, but there are definitely bad actors in every industry. It's extremely sad to see this kind of legislation go through the budget.
So what's going on with that? Is it Rita? They were giving out money. They had no idea what, supposed to create jobs and
Oh,
what's
WEDC?
going on with that?
Okay, so the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation was the governor's new jobs agency. When he first got elected, he said he was going to create 250,000 jobs. That was part of his campaign. He said he was going to create a new department instead of the Commerce Department. He essentially privatized it, and it's called WEDC, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. They have lost or given away $124 million, taxpayer dollars, to businesses that either haven't paid it back, went out of business, you name it. Some of these loans were unsecured loans, no collateral. None of us can walk into a bank and say, hey, give me like $100K, give me $1 million. And they're like, okay, here you go, no collateral. Don't have to take your car or house, you name it. It's unbelievable. One corporate executive actually lied. He said on the form that he was not sued, even though he was sued twice. We found out via open records request that this gentleman was planning on using the taxpayer dollars to fund a loan for his Maserati. I am not making that up. He had a Maserati that he was going to use taxpayer dollars to pay for his loan. This is the kind of corrupt behavior that we have seen happen in Madison, where the cronies who donate to the governor, this guy donated to the governor, get a huge return on investment by these unsecured loans, don't have to pay them back sometimes, oh, went out of business. And so Senator Lassa and Peter Barca are both on the WEDC board. They introduced a new hybrid model for WEDC that would help spur job growth, create jobs, but also make sure that people who take taxpayer dollars for companies are held accountable. One corporation actually outsourced jobs 3 times in 5 years and got several loans from WEDC. I think that's wrong. You shouldn't be able to take any money if you're outsourcing jobs. So we have a bill and Democrats that would also do that, and I would hope that in the future Republicans could join us on that, 'cause I don't think outsourcing benefits the American worker at all, and if companies are doing that, then they should definitely not be taking taxpayer money to fund the outsourcing of workers. So it's been a disaster from day one, in my opinion, and we hope to keep on putting pressure on the majority in Madison to actually take a look at reforming WEDC so it actually works.
Earlier this year, there was a ruckus where the other side tried to hide and come up with a different scenario with open records requests and stuff. Is there any plans to come up with a law to strengthen the open records or put it in the state constitution?
Great question. The question was about the open records kerfuffle over the holiday weekend on July 4th. Republicans introduced an amendment to the budget that would have taken away any government, whether it's your city council, your county, your school boards, or your state legislators, or your governor, your right to request information from their offices about what they're working on, what they're doing, what they're saying to other people. This bill, only Republicans voted for it, Democrats voted against it, happened over, it was like July 3rd. And that weekend, it was a storm of media scrutiny and people speaking out all over the state. Because obviously, if you're a taxpayer and a Wisconsin community member and citizen, you deserve to have access to your government and deserve to know what's going on. So they quickly said, oh, it was a mistake. We didn't mean to do that. We're going to put it back in. So they repealed it. But we found out just 2 weeks ago that the Speaker of the Assembly, Robin Vos, had drafted a bill to gut Wisconsin's open records. So they're at it again. And my Republican colleagues on the Assembly floor, when we introduced a resolution to say that we were committed to open government and our open records law, voted against it, and said, we want to protect our constituents by not disclosing their identities. Well, that's interesting because what they really want to protect is the companies who are writing the legislation that we've seen happen. They'll actually just the lobbyists will give them a bill and they'll just submit it as if the company was an elected official. That's what they're embarrassed about, so they're trying to hide it. Democrats have introduced 3 bills to counteract this. One is a constitutional amendment that would enshrine in our Wisconsin state constitution the public's right to open records. So if they introduced a bill, they'd have to actually amend the Constitution, which would take about 4 years to do. So we're committed to that. We also have 2 other bills related to open records and open government that are bills and not legislation that basically say the same thing. So we're trying several routes. I think this is one of the most important issues. I don't think that if we have a government that's shady and hiding behind the curtain and not honest and open and accountable, then there's nothing that we can do as part of democracy to fix it. So the biggest loss our state could take would be in these open records laws and shutting down government to the people. And this is a big fight, but I do think I'm positive that we can win it if we get enough people to speak out. The good news is editorial boards, media, they don't like it either because it's how they do their jobs. And so we have a really strong ally in them because they will lose their jobs and they won't be able to sell newspapers and be on TV and do the radio if they don't have access to what we're doing. So I think that's helpful, and keep on speaking out about it. It's very important.
But in a democracy, that's what you want.
Absolutely.
It's got to be open. It has
Yep.
to be.
Yep.
I mean, I think that's so absurd. And don't you think, on that note, that you've got 3 years left with this government? Do you think he's going to make it any easier on you?
Well, I would hope so. I'm going to try to meet with him. The last time I requested a meeting was December, and I still have. It was on right to work in December. Wanted to find out if he was going to pass it or not. Still has not met with me. Last year, 2 years ago, he met with me on a frequent basis if I asked on an issue. So that's. I think, first of all, let's get some FaceTime with him, but I have to say I don't trust them at all. I don't trust a word they say, because every single time they make a promise, they go around and stab workers in the back. Public employees are about to be attacked again. During Act 10, the governor said, well, you guys don't need collective bargaining rights because you have civil service protections. Well, one of his first things he does on the way back home from losing the presidential campaign with the tail between his legs is, well, let's attack workers by taking away those protections. We can just fire anyone for any reason, and there's no seniority. And guess what? We don't need a civil service exam. We'll just take resumes. Well, okay, what happens when that happens? Jim from Baraboo, did you sign the recall? Sorry, Jim, we get that you're a great public employee, but you're gone. Hey, Bob, you believe in science? Well, that has a liberal bias. You can't work at the DNR. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that can happen. So I think we have to watch very carefully. We need to talk about the Wisconsin retirement system as well, the best publicly funded pension system in the nation. I think that might come up at some point, and I'm hoping that there's enough public outcry to stop it. The best advice that I have, this last budget was absolutely terrible, and a lot of my colleagues have said it's the worst budget they've ever seen. We were able to fix things like senior care. We're going to cut senior care by $15 million and force people onto Medicare Part D. Open records, teacher licensing. They basically repealed teacher licensing so anyone could teach, just crazy stuff. Because it was so bad and so many people flooded the Capitol, we actually won those. Now you might say, well, Katrina, so many people flooded the Capitol for right to work. So many people flooded the Capitol for Act 10. You're right, they did. It's not a formula that works every time, but it's important to do and to not give up, because if we stay quiet and we say, well, you know what, it doesn't matter because they're going to do it anyway, I think it's endorsing their agenda, and I think it gives them more power and less scrutiny, so I do think it's important to stay involved and keep watching, and I know I'll be very vigilant. I'm suspicious already of some of the things they're talking about, but I also think it's helpful to advance an alternative agenda, so people can't say, well, you're just complaining, what's your solution? Here's my solution. I have 20 bills that I think should pass that would help rebuild the middle class and bring it back. That's what I want to work on. And then people are more willing to listen because they're like, well, you're not being partisan, you're just caring about the average citizen. And that's where we need to go. Any other questions? Yes.
I'd like to just mention something, that we're from Watertown, and we sit on the city sits on the county line between Jefferson and Dodge. So we're hearing down there this thing that's going on through redistricting. The Sensenbrenner's district has shifted to the west now. It's gone one way. And Scott Fitzgerald's Senate district has shifted to the east. Now they overlap. And then if Sensenbrenner will retire, Scott's being groomed for that congressional seat.
Okay.
Have you heard anything on that?
I have not heard that.
Okay.
I think Jim Sensenbrenner has been for an extremely long time, so I wouldn't be surprised if he'd retire soon.
Yeah.
But I think it's time to start talking to your friends and neighbors about who could run against him, because he has left behind a devastating legacy in the Capitol, and if he wants to run, you know what you can hit him on? Open records. He drafted that legislation with Speaker Vaughn. He needs to be held accountable. So I would start working on that now, so you've got someone ready to go if that really happens. Yes.
You can run for governor in a few years?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I
Nothing here.
done a lot. It's really kind. I'm so committed to the people of Wisconsin and my district, and I always say, never shut a door, but I also just love my district so much, and so I'm happy serving in the assembly and think it's a great opportunity. So, thank you.
That was a good answer.
All right.
Maybe.
Well, it's been such a pleasure, and if I can help you in any way, please let me know. I would be happy to talk to you, and I'll leave a few cards in case you want to reach out. And thank you all so much for the work you do. I know it's a really tough time right now for a lot of people, but just remember that we're in this together. And when we die, we can't leave behind much, but we can leave behind a community that we built and that we're proud of, and our legacy can be about our hard work and how we kept going in spite of the odds. So I try to think of that, and I really thank you for all you do for our state.